Welcome back to This is Thailand. Now, most of the stories we tell on this channel follow a recognizable shape. Man arrives, man meets woman, man ignores the warnings he was given, man loses the money. You know the arc. And there's a reason that arc repeats, because it keeps happening to men who ought to know better in places that are very good at making you forget what you ought to know. But today's story is a bit different, and I want you to pay attention to why. Brendan is 63 years old. He's from Cork, in the south of Ireland. He spent 31 years as an IT support technician, the kind of man who fixes problems quietly without fuss and goes home at the end of the day having kept everything running for people who barely knew his name. He is not a reckless man. He is not a naive man. He did his research before he came here. He read the forums. He knew what the risks were supposed to look like. And that, if I'm being honest with you, is exactly what makes his story worth hearing. This one is going to stay with you. Here's Brendan, in his own words. I'll tell you something about IT support that nobody outside of it really understands. The job is 90% invisible. When things go wrong, everyone knows about it. When you fix it and things go right again, nobody notices a thing. That's not a complaint. It's just the nature of it. You keep the system running. The system runs. Nobody thinks about the system. I was grand with that. I want to be clear about that from the start, because I'm aware it sounds like I'm setting up some story about a man who felt underappreciated his whole life and went looking for validation in the wrong place. That's not quite it. I had Mare, 26 years. We built a small life in Cork, a 2-bedroom terrace off the South Douglas Road, a garden she looked after better than I did, a routine that suited us both. I didn't need the world to notice me. I had somewhere to come home to. When she got the diagnosis, I did what I always do. I made a system of it. There were oncology appointments every 3 weeks, so I put them in the calendar. The hospital car park was a particular nightmare. I learned which floors were usually free. There were medications that had to be taken with food and medications that couldn't be taken within 2 hours of each other, so I built a spreadsheet. Not because I'm cold, because that's how I'm useful. That's the only way I know how to love something, to make sure it works, to keep it running. She died on a Tuesday morning in February. It was very quiet. I held her hand, and then I didn't know what to do with my hands. The thing about grief that nobody tells you, or nobody told me anyway, is that it doesn't always arrive as a wave. Sometimes it arrives as a to-do list, funeral arrangements, solicitor, probate, the house. I had things to manage for another 4 months after she died, and I managed them. And then one morning I woke up and there was nothing left to manage. The system had no more tasks, and I sat at the kitchen table in Cork with a cup of tea going cold, and I genuinely could not think of a single reason to stand up. That went on for a while, 8 months roughly. I kept moving, went to the shops, made dinners I didn't eat, watched television I can't remember. A colleague of mine, Fiona Walla, from the old job, had her son home for a few weeks over the summer, a young lad called Kieran, who'd spent 2 years teaching English in Chiang Mai. They had a small retirement due for me at the office, which was kind of them. Kieran was there, talking about Thailand the way young people talk about places they've been. Not selling it exactly, just assuming it's interesting, which it is when you're 26, and that was your life. The cost of living, the weather, the pace of things. I was half listening. I was half listening to most things at that point. But I went home that evening and looked it up, and then I kept looking. I read everything I could find, the forums, the expat blogs, the Reddit threads. I'm methodical that way. I read the ones that said it was paradise, and I read the ones that said it would eat you alive, and I tried to locate the truth somewhere between the two. I knew what Pattaya was. I want to make that clear. I'm not a man who walked into any of this without reading the documentation. I saw what certain parts of Bangkok were. I saw the forums where men described handing over their savings to women they'd known for 3 weeks. And I read them with what I can only describe as bewildered pity. That wouldn't be me. I was 62 years old. I'd spent 3 decades troubleshooting systems for a living. I understood that if something looks too good to be true, then you check the source code before you install it. Chiang Mai looked different, smaller, less frantic. People on the forums used words like livable and real, which are vague but pointed me in a direction. I sold the house. I'd been thinking about it for a while because there was no good reason to keep it and a few practical reasons not to. Cleared the mortgage, walked away with about 155,000 euros. More money than I'd ever had sitting in one place in my life, which sounds like a lot until you consider it's also everything, and then it sounds like not quite enough. I booked a flight in September, one way with a loose plan to figure out the return when I had a better sense of things. The first morning in Chiang Mai, I woke up at 5 o'clock because my body hadn't adjusted, and I walked out of the guest house near the old city, and the air was warm in a way that Cork air is never warm, even in summer. And there were monks in orange robes walking in a line along the road, collecting alms, and a woman selling mu ping, little pork skewers, from a cart, and a dog sleeping in the middle of the pavement that nobody was walking around because everyone was just stepping over it like that was normal. And I thought, right, this is somewhere else entirely. I enrolled in a Thai language course within the first week. That wasn't romanticism. I want to be honest about my reasons. I needed something to do with my mornings. Structure, a place to be at a specific time for a specific purpose. The school was near Niman Road, a small place up a flight of stairs above a travel agent, and the class had 6 students, the youngest of whom was about 45, which I found, I don't know, reassuring somehow, like I wasn't entirely out of my depth. My teacher was a young man named Arthur, very patient, with a particular quality of patience that suggests he'd dealt with worse than me. He told me after the first session that my tones were unusually careful for a beginner. I told him that was probably just how Irish people talked. He laughed. I think he was being polite, but I kept coming back, and I kept paying attention, and it turned out I had a quiet aptitude for it. Not gift. I wouldn't overstate it. Aptitude. The difference between someone who finds a thing natural and someone who is simply willing to sit with it until it makes sense. There was a cafe I started going to most afternoons. Just down the road from the school. Nothing special. Plastic chairs, a ceiling fan. The kind of place that has 3 things on the menu and does all 3 of them well. I'd sit with a Thai iced tea in my notebook and work through that morning's vocabulary. There was a woman who worked the counter. I noticed her in the way you notice someone who is good at what they do. Efficient, quick, no unnecessary movement. Her English was functional, and she corrected my Thai order once, gently without drawing attention to it, just saying the right tones back to me like an echo, so I'd hear the difference. I appreciated that. It was the kind of thing Mara would have done, actually. The quiet correction, no fuss made. I didn't think anything of it, particularly. I just kept coming back. The language course ran for 2 weeks officially. I signed up for another 2 after that. Arthur seemed neither surprised nor particularly pleased. I suspect he'd seen his share of retired foreigners who'd realized that having something to do at 9 in the morning was worth paying for. I wasn't under any illusion about my progress. I could order food without pointing at it. I could ask directions and understand roughly 30% of the answer. I could count, apologize, and express that something was very delicious, which covered a surprising number of social situations. The city was starting to make sense to me in the way cities do when you stop being a tourist and start being someone who lives somewhere. I knew which Song Thayu, the little red pickup truck taxis, would take me toward Niman and which ones went the other direction around the moat. I knew that the 7-Eleven on the corner near my guest house got a fresh delivery of those pressed sandwiches at 7 in the morning, and they were gone by 9. Small things, but small things are how you stop feeling like you're passing through. I should say something about the money situation, because it's relevant to everything that comes after. I was living on my Irish state pension, about 1,100 euros a month, which in Chiang Mai stretches considerably further than it did in Cork. My guest house near Thafi Gate was 12,000 baht a month, roughly 310 euros. Clean room, private bathroom, a little balcony where I drink my morning coffee and watch the street wake up. Food was cheap if you ate Thai, which I did. A bowl of cow tom from the market near the school cost 30 baht. 40 for the mu ping. I could live well on half my pension and leave the rest sitting. The 155,000 euros from the house sale I'd transferred to a Thai bank account to satisfy the retirement visa requirements. You need 800,000 baht seasoned in a Thai account, which worked out to just over that. And I wasn't planning to touch the rest of it if I could help it. That was the plan anyway. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Her name was Ornisha, Nok to everyone who knew her, because Thai people almost always go by a nickname, and Nok, which means bird, suited her in a way I only understood later, when I'd seen her sit absolutely still for a moment and then move very suddenly like something startled. She was 38. She had a daughter named Prey, 7 years old, who I wouldn't meet for another couple of months. She'd been married once, to a Thai man who'd left when Prey was 2, and she told me this not as a dramatic disclosure, but as plain fact, the way you'd mentioned that you'd had a previous job. No performance of wound. I found this refreshing in a way I probably should have examined more carefully. We talked at first the way you talk to someone whose cafe you visit regularly. Pleasantries, observations about the weather, her correcting my Thai, me attempting to be self-deprecating in a language I barely spoke. She had a dry sense of humor, not showy about it. She'd say something and then just continue with what she was doing, which is how I tend to operate myself, and I noticed that we could be quiet in the same space without it being awkward. This sounds like a small thing. At 63 and alone and 10,000 kilometers from anyone who knew my name, it was not a small thing. I asked her to dinner about 6 weeks in. I'd thought about it for longer than I care to admit. I asked her simply, with as little ceremony as possible, because I was aware that I was a 63-year-old man with a pension and a notebook full of Thai vocabulary asking a 38-year-old woman to dinner, and I didn't want to make a production of it that would require her to let me down gently. She paused for a moment, genuinely considered it, I thought, and then said yes. I told myself that pause was significant, that a woman running a game would have said yes immediately, warmly, with both hands. The pause meant she was making an actual decision. I still think that's partially true. I've turned it over many times and I still think that's partially true. We went to a small northern Thai place on one of the lanes off Niman. Nothing fancy, earthenware pots, wooden furniture, a shrine in the corner with a garland of marigolds going slightly brown at the edges. I had the cow soy because Arthit had told me it was the dish Chiang Mai was known for, and I hadn't tried it yet, which Nok found genuinely funny, that I'd been there 6 weeks and hadn't had the cow soy, the curry broth, the egg noodles, the crispy ones on top. I understood immediately why people made a fuss about it. The months that followed were, I want to say ordinary, but in the best sense of it. Sunday afternoon at the Walking Street Market near Willai Road, picking through handmade silverware, while Nok told me which stalls were actually good and which were tourist prices dressed up. A weekend to Pai, a small town 3 hours north through mountain roads that nearly finished me on the minibus. I don't have the stomach for hairpin bends that I perhaps once did. The cost of all of it across those first 2 months was somewhere around 15,000 to 20,000 baht. Maybe 400 euros, 500 euros total. What you'd spend on any relationship. Dinners, transport, a guest house in Pai that was 800 baht a night and had a view of rice fields. Nothing that registered as anything other than the ordinary cost of not being alone. She helped with my Thai sometimes in the evenings. She'd take my notebook and write out corrections in her careful handwriting, and occasionally she'd laugh at something I'd gotten badly wrong. Not unkindly, just genuinely finding it funny. And I'd sit there thinking, this is a person who is comfortable with me. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. I noticed her phone turning face down in the evenings when it lit up. I noticed this the way you notice something and immediately find a reason for it that suits you. Privacy, habit, nothing. She mentioned a cousin occasionally, a man who helped her with things when the cafe's landlord was being difficult. I never met this cousin. I filed that away somewhere I wasn't looking. The first request, and I use that word loosely because it wasn't really a request, came in the 3rd month. Her motorbike needed a repair. The carburetor, she thought, or something to do with it. She said the name of the part in Thai, and I didn't catch it. 8,000 baht, about 210 euros. She mentioned it the way you mention a problem you're working out, not looking at me when she said it, moving glasses behind the counter. I said I'd cover it before she finished the sentence. She looked up then and said she wasn't asking me to do that. I said I knew. We left it there. A few weeks later, her daughter's school fees came due. 22,000 baht, just over 570 euros. She mentioned this one later in the evening when we were walking back toward my side of the old city, more to herself than to me, that she needed to sort that out this week. I said I'd transfer it to her. She stopped walking. She said that was too much. I said it really wasn't, and that was the truth. Against what I had, it was nothing. And eventually she accepted it with a quietness that I interpreted as dignity. That distinction she mentioned I offered. I want you to hold on to that, because I held on to it. I used it to explain a great deal to myself over the following months. She never asks, I'd think. She just mentions. And I offer freely because I have it and she doesn't, and that's simply how it is. I told myself I was being realistic about money and relationships and cultural difference, which was true, and also, as I understand now, extremely convenient. The thing about Knox's mother falling ill is that I believed it completely, and I still do. I want to be clear about that before I explain what happened, because the easiest version of this story is the one where everything was invented from the start, and I don't think that's honest. Her name was Mei Deng, Mother Deng, effectively, Deng meaning red, though I never found out why. She had kidney problems. That was real. Knock got the first call on a Tuesday afternoon in early December, and I was at the cafe when it came in, and I watched Knock's face while she listened, and it did something I don't think you can practice. A very specific kind of stillness that isn't composure. It's the stillness of someone who has just heard news they were half expecting and had hoped not to receive. She went to Lampang the following morning. Lampang is an hour south of Chiang Mai, a smaller city, quieter, with those old wooden temples and horse-drawn carriages you don't see anywhere else in Thailand. She went again 4 days after that. I offered to drive her down the second time. I'd hired a car for a few days to explore, and she said no. The Song Theo was fine. She didn't want to impose. I think about that now. She didn't want to impose. Whether that was genuine feeling or careful management, I genuinely cannot tell you. The hospital costs started coming into the conversation around the third week. Not as a direct ask. I want to be precise about this, because the mechanism matters. We were having dinner at a place on the east side of the old city, a little curry shop with wooden benches and a television on the wall showing a soap opera at low volume. And she was telling me about the dialysis treatment Mei Deng had started, the schedule of it, the cost of it each session, and I asked how much we were talking about. She gave me the figure, 45,000 baht for the first month's treatment plus the admission costs, about 1,180 euros. I said I'd like to help with that. She put her spoon down. She looked at me for a moment in a way that was hard to read. Not the pause before gratitude, something more complicated than that. Then she said that this was not why she was telling me. I said I understood that. She said the amounts were too large. I said they weren't, not for me, and that was simply the truth. After a while, she said that if I was sure, she would accept it, but that she was keeping a record and she would pay me back as circumstances allowed. I told her not to worry about that, which was possibly generous of me or possibly something else. I'm still not entirely sure of my own motives. I had the money. She needed it. The mother was genuinely ill. All of that is true. But there was also, and I'll be honest about this because it's relevant, there was also the part of me that understood, quite clearly, that this act of help cemented something, made me indispensable in a particular way, made me the person who had shown up when it mattered. I told myself I wasn't thinking that, but I'm the man who built spreadsheets for Mayor's medication, so you can make your own judgment about whether I was capable of not thinking it. I went down to Lampang once, about 3 weeks after the treatment started. Nok met me at the hospital, a provincial government place, not fancy, the corridors smelling of disinfectant and something floral I couldn't identify. A spirit house by the entrance with fresh jasmine garlands. Mei Deng was in a room with 2 other patients. Small woman, very thin, the particular blankness of someone who'd spent too long in that specific kind of exhaustion. A grandchild, Nok's niece, maybe 7 or 8, was sitting with her and did the translating, which mostly amounted to Mei Deng saying something brief and the child rendering it as thank you. She says, thank you, I weighed, pressed my hands together and bowed, which is the Thai greeting and mark of respect, and which I'd been practicing in the language classes because Arthit had stressed it was important with elders. Mei Deng's expression softened a fraction. The niece seemed pleased that I'd done it right. On the way back to Chiang Mai, Knox said she appreciated that I had come. That was all. No elaboration. I drove and she looked out the window and we didn't need to fill the silence, which still felt like proof of something. Now here is where I have to be careful and honest at the same time, which is not always easy. The cultural expectation in Thailand, particularly from Asan, the northeastern region where Knox's family was originally from, is that you support your parents, not as an option, as an obligation as fundamental as anything you could name. The eldest daughter especially carries that weight. Nok was the eldest. Her brothers had their own families in Lampang. She was the one in the city with what appeared to be a steady income, and now a foreign companion with a retirement visa and a house's worth of savings in a Thai bank account. I had read about this. I knew this. I'd spent several evenings on expat forums where men listed the amounts they'd sent to village families as cautionary tales, and I'd read all of it carefully. I understood that the financial dimension of relationships with Thai women was not manipulation in the same sense as, say, a confidence trick, but rather a collision between two very different ideas about what money in a relationship means and who it belongs to. I told myself I was factoring this in, that I was approaching the situation with cultural awareness rather than Farang naivety. I was clear-eyed, I thought. I knew what I was doing and why. What I was actually doing, I understand now, was using my intellectual grasp of the culture as a kind of permission slip. I know what this is. Therefore it is fine. Therefore I can proceed. Yet the knowledge became a justification rather than a protection. That's a distinction worth sitting with, if any of this sounds familiar to you. The phone went face down one evening when I was at her apartment. She'd started having me over a few evenings a week, cooking cow pad moo and whatever was fresh from the market, and she said it was her cousin checking in about mating. I said of course, and did not ask anything else. She had mentioned this cousin 3 or 4 times by then, always the cousin, never a name that stuck, never an offer to introduce us, never a suggestion that I might meet him. I noticed this and I filed it and I reached, as I had become accustomed to reaching, for the most reasonable explanation available. That was the 4th month. The filing cabinet in my head was getting full. I hadn't opened it yet. By the 5th month, I had met Prey properly, which changed things in a way I hadn't anticipated and couldn't entirely account for. She was 7, small for her age, very serious about most things, with the particular gravity of children who've spent a lot of time around adults and absorbed some of it. She called me Lung Brendan, Lung meaning uncle, which is the polite form of address for an older man you're not related to, and which Nok had apparently coached her in beforehand. She showed me her school books the first evening with the solemnity of someone presenting documentation. I looked at the mass pages and told her, in my best Thai, that her work was very good, and she corrected my pronunciation of very without looking up, which I found, I don't know. Charming isn't quite the right word. It just felt familiar. And like someone I could be comfortable around. I'm aware of how that sounds. I'm aware that the child of a woman you're romantically involved with is not a neutral figure in the story, and that warmth toward the child can be used, consciously or not, as another form of entanglement. I believed then, and I believe now, that Prey was simply a child who liked having someone around who treated her seriously and helped with the maths. But I also know that my feelings about Prey made certain things harder to consider clearly. You can hold both of those things. The land came into the picture in the 5th month on a quiet Thursday evening at a restaurant near the night bazaar. Not a tourist place, a local one, the kind with plastic tablecloths and a fish tank by the door that I always found slightly ominous. We were eating tom kha gai, which is the coconut milk soup, and Nok was quieter than usual. I didn't push. Eventually she said she'd had news from Lampang. Not about Mei Deng's health specifically. She was stable. The dialysis was managing things. But about the family land. A plot near her mother's village. a few RIE of agricultural land that had been in the family for 2 generations. The medical debts had accumulated. There were other debts she hadn't mentioned previously. I didn't press on what kind. The land was at risk of being sold to cover them. If it went, the family had no underlying asset, nothing to fall back on. Mei Dang would effectively have nothing to leave. She wasn't asking me directly. I want to make sure that's clear, because by this point the mechanism of mention and offer had become so established between us that a direct ask would have felt almost crude. She was describing a situation, a worry. She was carrying it in the way she carried things, without drama, and she was letting me see her carry it. I asked the figure. She said 280,000 baht, just over 7,350 euros. I said I'd need to think about it. And I meant that. I genuinely meant it, which is the part one want you to understand. I wasn't stalling for courtesy. I was 63 years old with 155,000 euros in a Thai bank account and a pension that covered my costs and then some. And 7,350 euros was, well, it was manageable, is the honest answer. I'd already spent roughly 2,000 euros across the previous months, between the motorbike and the school fees and the hospital contribution. And that hadn't dented anything significantly. The land figure was larger, but it wasn't beyond consideration. I wanted a week to run the numbers properly, to think about the implications, to decide whether this was a line I was willing to cross. Because I understood even then that helping with a motorbike repair is different from helping secure family land, and that the second act changes what you are in the situation in ways the first one doesn't. I gave myself a week. I want to be honest about what I was actually doing with that week, because this is also relevant. I wasn't just running numbers. I was also underneath the spreadsheet thinking, hoping that the decision would feel clearer by the end of it, that something would resolve itself into an obvious yes or an obvious no. I've learned that I tend to make decisions by waiting until one option becomes uncomfortable enough to abandon. It's not a heroic method, but it's mine. On the fourth day, a Tuesday, ordinary afternoon, the dry season heat sitting heavily outside, and the ceiling fan in Knock's apartment doing what it could about it, I was sitting in the chair by the window reading A History of the Lanna Kingdom, which is what Chiang Mai was part of before the Thai state consolidated, which I'd picked up at a second-hand bookshop near Tha Phi Gate because Arthur had mentioned it, and I found I was interested in the context of the place I was living. Knock was in the kitchen. Then her phone went, and she said she'd take it in the bedroom, and she did, pulling the door most of the way shut behind her. I was reading. I was also, and this happened gradually rather than as a decision, listening. My Thai by this point was what I describe as functional to conversational in calm conditions. I could follow a news program if they weren't rushing. I could manage in a shop, at the immigration office, in a restaurant. I could follow most of what Arthur said in class without needing the translation. I'd been at it for 5 months by then, practicing daily. What I couldn't do was follow fast emotional speech, thick regional accent, or conversation happening through a wall at low volume in which one was only catching fragments. I caught perhaps 60% of it. Enough. She was speaking to a man. I could hear that much from the register of her voice. Not how she spoke to her brothers, not how she spoke to the women who ran the stall next to the cafe, not how she spoke to family. Something else, something easier and more familiar than she was with me, which I registered somewhere that wasn't quite conscious thought. I heard Farang Konne, this foreigner here, meaning me. I heard Jaidi Tai Bao Ruarai. I'd learned Jaidi in my second week. It means good heart or kind-hearted. Bao Ruarai means doesn't know anything, doesn't understand anything. The construction together is something like good-hearted but clueless. I heard in a sentence I didn't catch entirely, but understood the shape of something about the land money, something about another month. And then I heard laughter, not sharp, not guilty, comfortable laughter. The laughter of two people in the middle of a conversation they've had before, about a situation that's proceeding as expected. I sat with my book open. The ceiling fan turned. Outside, a motorbike went past on the SOI below with a particular metallic sound from its exhaust that I'd heard every day for 5 months and had stopped noticing. I noticed it now. My eyes didn't move for a long time. She came back out after perhaps 10 minutes. I don't know exactly. I wasn't watching the time. I was watching the page in front of me and making sure I was still on the same page I'd been on when the call started. She said the call was from her cousin, something about May Dang's next appointment. I said right and asked whether she wanted tea. She said yes. I got up and went to the kitchen and filled the kettle and stood there while it heated, and I was very calm. That's the thing I remember most clearly. Not shaken, not spinning. I'm calm in the specific way you go, calm when something you half suspected has been confirmed, and the uncertainty, which was itself a kind of suffering, has resolved into something solid you can stand on. I made 2 cups of tea. I brought them back. We sat. I asked a question about the book 1500 had been reading, some detail about the Lana Kingdom, something Arthur had mentioned, and she answered it, and we talked about that for a while. And then I said I should get back. I had things to sort out in the morning. She walked me to the door. She touched my arm briefly when I left. I walked back to the guest house through the old city, past the temple at the corner of Ratchamanka Road, where there were always a few monks in the early evenings, past the 7-Eleven, where I sometimes bought those pressed sandwiches for breakfast, through air that smelled of incense and grilling meat from a cart on the corner. I didn't go back to look at what I'd heard. Not that night. I went to bed and I slept, which surprised me. But the 3 evenings that followed I spent in a way I can only describe as a structured review. Not a dramatic reckoning. I'm not built for dramatic reckonings. I sat at the small table in my room, and I went through the previous 5 months the way I'd go through a system that wasn't behaving as expected. What was real? What wasn't? Where was the actual fault? And where was just normal wear? I tried to be honest with myself, which is harder than it sounds when you're also the person who made all the decisions under review. The things I put in the genuine column, her humor, which I'd recognized from the start as something you can't entirely fake without it becoming exhausting. The mother's illness. May Dang was genuinely unwell. I'd seen her, and kidney failure doesn't perform on command. Prey, who was simply a 7-year-old who liked having help with her math homework, and who I don't believe knew anything about any arrangement. The times Knock had been patient with me. The times she'd laughed at something I'd said, and the laugh had landed slightly before she seemed to expect it would, which is the tell of a real laugh. These went in the genuine column. The things I put in the other column, the cousin I never met, the phone face down. The progression of financial involvement, which I could now see when I laid it out in sequence, had a logic to it that I had attributed to circumstance, but which could equally be attributed to planning. Motorbike, small. School fees, moderate. Hospital, larger. Land, substantial. Each step calibrated to a man who would offer rather than be asked, which is a particular kind of man, and apparently one she had identified correctly. And the conversation through the wall, which I could not put anywhere other than where it belonged. Here is the conclusion I reached, and I've held it since, and not been able to find a flaw in it. Some of it was real. Both things are true simultaneously. She enjoyed my company. She was also managing me. These are not mutually exclusive. This is in some ways the harder version of the story to carry, because if it had been entirely false, I could put it down cleanly. It wasn't entirely false, and so I can't. A week passed. I didn't bring up the land. I kept to my routines. Language class in the morning, the cafe in the afternoon, though I chose a different one, a place on Moon Muang Road I'd noticed before but never tried. I was civil with Knock when I saw her. I gave nothing away. I'm not proud of that particularly, but I'm also not ashamed. I was protecting myself in the only way I know how, which is by keeping the system running while I worked out what to do with it. She raised the land over coffee on the 8th day, very gently. Had he had a chance to think? She used the polite form, the one she used with people she was being careful with. I said I'd had a look at my finances and it wasn't possible right now. I said it flat. No apology in it, just information. She looked at me for a moment, and then she nodded. That was it. One nod, and she moved on, asked whether I'd tried the new coffee place near Maya Mall. She'd heard it was good. I've thought about that nod a great deal. A woman who was primarily invested in me, in the relationship, in what it was, and in what it might become, would have asked something. Are you all right? Is everything okay? Do you want to talk about it? Something. The nod was the response of someone who had received a piece of information about a project that would need a different approach and had filed it accordingly. That nod told me everything I needed to know and nothing I wanted to hear. Over the next 3 weeks, I made myself less available. Not dramatically. No sudden absence. No excuse that required explanation. I was busy. I was tired. I had a thing on. The gradual withdrawal of a man who has decided something and is implementing it quietly. I extended my visa at the immigration office on the superhighway. The non-O retirement extension, third stamp in the passport now, were routine enough that the officer barely looked up, and I moved to a smaller room across the old city, on the other side near Chiang Mai Road. Different neighborhood, different 7-Eleven. She sent line messages, friendly ones, no urgency, checking in. I replied. Then less. Then a message that didn't get answered for 2 days. Then one that didn't get answered at all. There was no confrontation. I'm Irish. We don't do that. And there was nothing to confront, technically. She had never directly asked me for anything, and I had never directly accused her of anything, and so there was no argument that needed having. Just a silence that grew until it was simply the absence of something that had been there before. The total, when I added it up, roughly 9,800 euros across 6 months. The motorbike, the school fees, the hospital contribution, the ordinary costs of 6 months of being in a relationship with someone. Enough to matter, not enough to ruin me. I still had the savings mostly intact. I still had the pension coming in. I was fine, in the financial sense of fine. In other senses, I was, well, that's the next chapter. Want to been in Chiang Mai for 14 months now? I mention this at the start because I know it's the first question people have when they hear this story. Why are you still there? And it's a fair question. I'd ask it myself. The honest answer is that I thought about going home, properly thought about it, around the time the last line message from Knock went unanswered. I sat with it for a week. Cork in February. The terrace off the South Douglas Road. Sold now. Someone else's garden. My sister in Ballincollig, who would make me tea and be kind and not ask too many questions because she's a decent person who understands that some things don't need to be named. I could have gone back. There was nothing stopping me, but I'd have been going back to the same kitchen table, the same cold cup of tea, the same absence of tasks, and I'd have added something new to it, the version of myself who tried something and didn't manage it and came home. I couldn't quite face that. Whether that's stubbornness or pride or something more defensible, I'll leave you to decide. So I stayed. I found a small apartment near Chiang Mai University, a proper one this time, not a guest house, a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a low-rise building with a balcony that looks out over a car park, which is not romantic. But it's mine and the rent is 9,500 baht a month, about 250 euros, and the woman downstairs has a cat that occasionally comes up and sits on my balcony without explanation, which I've come to find companionable. Small things, but I've learned to pay attention to small things. I still study Thai. This is the detail that people, particularly people who hear bits of this story secondhand, tend to find strange or even perverse. Why would you keep learning the language that lets you understand what you overheard? The answer is that the language didn't betray me, the language protected me. If I'd been sitting in that room with 30 words of Thai instead of 5 months of careful study, I'd have heard laughter through a wall and thought nothing of it and handed over 7,350 euros for family land. I have no legal claim to in a country where I can't own land anyway, and I'd have been on a plane home 18 months later with considerably less money and considerably more bitterness. The Thai didn't hurt me. The Thai saved me. And beyond that, it keeps something in me engaged that needs to stay engaged. I'm 63 years old and my wife is dead, and I live alone in a city where I came to feel something again. And the language is a reason to pay attention every day. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. I should tell you what I lost, clearly and without drama, because I think clarity is useful and drama isn't. Money approximately 9,800 euros across 6 months. The motorbike repair, the school fees, it's the hospital contribution, the ordinary costs of 6 months of not being alone. I still have the bulk of the 155,000 euros. My pension still comes in. I am financially fine. Anyone who's lost genuinely serious money to a situation like this, and there are men who've lost everything, their house funds, their entire retirement, I've met them in the expat community here, would rightly tell me to stop complaining, and I'd have to agree with them. What I lost that I can't put a number on is harder to describe precisely. It's the version of the story where it was simply true, where a careful man, a methodical man, a man who'd done his research and read the forms and chosen the right city and learned the language and moved slowly, where that man turned out to have been right to trust his judgment. I'd let myself believe that story, not completely, not with complete naivety, but enough. Enough that losing it has a specific weight. The particular thing that stays with me, and I'm going to say this plainly because I think it's the most useful part, is not that I was fooled. It's that the way I was fooled was so specifically me. Whoever I was dealing with, and I still don't know the full shape of it, I've made my peace with not knowing, understood that I was a man who would offer rather than be asked, who would feel that distinction mattered, who would use his own cultural knowledge as reassurance that he was being clear-eyed when he was actually using it as cover. My carefulness was not a protection, it was a profile. It was used. I've thought about Meyer quite a bit in the months since. I don't do this maudlinly. I'm not a maudlin person, and she wouldn't have had any patience for it anyway. But I've thought about why I came here and what I was actually looking for. And I think the honest answer is that I'd been useful for a long time and then I wasn't. And somewhere in the gap between those two things, I'd confused being needed with being loved. And I came to Thailand carrying that confusion without knowing I had it. And it was the confusion that made me vulnerable more than anything else. That confusion didn't start in Chiang Mai. It started in Cork at a kitchen table with a cold cup of tea. The lesson I'd offer for what it's worth from a man who spent 31 years keeping other people's systems running, the fact that some of it was real doesn't mean all of it was safe. Both things can be true. A woman can enjoy your company and also be managing you. A family can genuinely need help, and the need can also be structured to reach you. Knowing the culture helps. Knowing the language helps. But neither of those things is the same as understanding everything. They just mean you understand more than she thought you did. And that laughter, I keep coming back to it. Not because she was laughing at me, though I suppose she was, in a sense. It's that she was laughing with someone, comfortably about how things were going, about me, and there was no cruelty in it, just the ease of two people who have done something before and are doing it again and expect it to work. That kind of laughter has a sound. Once you've heard it, you don't forget it. I still go to the language class on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Arthit has moved on. There's a new teacher now, a woman named Wanwisa, who has less patience but is possibly a better teacher for it. I'm at an intermediate level now, which sounds impressive until you try to follow a conversation between two people speaking quickly and realize how much you're still missing. But less than before, a little less all the time. That's enough, I think, for now. That's enough. And that's Brendan's story. There's a version of this that's easier to tell. The one where the woman was simply dishonest and the man was simply fooled. And the lesson is simply, don't trust strangers in a foreign country. That version exists. We've told it on this channel before, and we'll tell it again because it happens. But Brendan's version is more complicated than that and more useful for it. He wasn't taken for everything. Knock wasn't simply a monster. The family obligations were real. The mother was genuinely ill, and some of what happened between them was genuinely something. The complexity is the point. What we'd say to anyone watching who recognizes something of themselves in Brendan, the careful men, the patient men, the men who believe that because they're methodical, they're protected, is this: carefulness is an asset. It genuinely is. But it can also be read. It can be understood and accounted for, and worked around by someone patient enough to do so. Being cautious is not the same as being safe. Thank you to Brendan for trusting us with this. It takes a particular kind of honesty to examine not just what happened, but how the way it happened was so specifically you. That's harder than it looks. And thank you for watching. This is Thailand. If this story has given you something to think about, whether you're planning a trip, living here already, or just trying to understand how these things unfold, then it's done what it was meant to do. Take care of yourselves out there. We'll see you next time. I noticed the pipeline has sent Chapter 7 already written in full as part of the previous chapter's output. It was embedded at the end of Chapter 6 in the submission. Rather than produce a duplicate, here is Chapter 7 written fresh and distinctly, maintaining continuity from where Chapter 6 ended, while ensuring this final chapter stands on its own, with the proper Brendan voice, followed by the host outro. People ask me sometimes, other expats mostly, the ones I've come to know slowly over these 14 months, whether I'm bitter about it, whether I'd warn men away from relationships here, whether I think Thailand is a trap. The answer to all three is no, and I want to explain why, because I think the no matters more than any of the yes answers would. I'm not bitter. Bitterness requires a simplicity I can't access. So you can only be purely bitter about something that was purely wrong, and this wasn't purely wrong. Some of it was real. I've said that already, and I'll say it again, because it keeps being true every time I test it. The evenings when we were comfortable in the same room, the way she laughed at things before she was ready to laugh at them. Pray, correcting my tie with the patient authority of a 7-year-old who has been doing this longer than you have. The Lampang Hospital, the jasmine garlands on the spirit house, the small woman in the bed who said thank you through a child's translation. Real, all of it real. The fact that other things were also real. The man on the phone, the comfortable laughter, the land money in its timeline, doesn't cancel the first set of things. It sits alongside them. That's the uncomfortable shape of it, and I've stopped trying to resolve the discomfort into something neater. I get up most mornings around 6. The neighborhood near the university has a different rhythm to the old city. Less tourist traffic, more students on motorbikes heading to early lectures. The smell of the noodle place on the corner that opens at 5:30 and does a cow tom I've had probably 200 times by now. I walk for an hour. This wasn't a habit I had in Cork. I drove everywhere, the way you do in Cork. But I have it now, and it seems to be doing something useful that I can't entirely name. Language class on Tuesday and Thursday. Juanwisa has less patience than Arthur did, but she's more exacting, which I've come to appreciate. She told me last month that my reading comprehension was now genuinely intermediate, and my speaking was still lagging behind because I was too careful with my tones, too worried about being wrong. She said this as a mild criticism. I found it, I don't know, funny, I suppose. I've spent 63 years being too careful. It's not a habit that breaks quickly. I want to say something directly to anyone watching this who recognizes something of themselves in what I've described. Not the Thailand part specifically, or the other part. The part where you've been useful for a long time and then you weren't. Where the system stopped and you kept going through the motions for a while because that's what you know how to do. Where someone offering you warmth and needing things from you felt on some level like having a purpose again. Not one where you confused being needed with being loved and didn't notice you'd done it until considerably later. I'm not saying don't go. I'm not saying don't try. I'd be a hypocrite, and also I'd be wrong. I'm still here. I'm still paying attention. On balance, the 14 months in Chiang Mai have contained more genuine living than the 8 months in Cork after Mar died. And that's not nothing. What I'm saying is, know what you're carrying when you arrive. Because whatever it is, it will be visible to certain people before you've said a word. Not to everyone. Most people you'll meet here are simply going about their lives and have no particular interest in your biography. But to some, and the ones who are interested in your biography in a structured way will understand it faster than you think. And they will understand specifically you, your method of protection, your particular vanity, the distinction you're making that you believe keeps you safe. Because patient observation is a skill, and some people have it and are using it. Brendan's profile, a man who would offer rather than be asked. A man who felt that distinction mattered. A man who used his own knowledge as reassurance. That's the profile that was worked with. Your profile will be different, but you'll have one. Everyone does. The laughter. I said I'd come back to it, and I will. One last time. It wasn't cruel. That's the part one keep returning to. If it had been cruel, I could have filed it and moved on. It was comfortable. The ease of two people who have done this before and expect it to work and are partway through it working. And the laughter of a situation proceeding normally. I was the situation. I was proceeding normally. That kind of laughter has a particular sound. Once you've heard it, once you've sat in a room with a book open and understood enough of what's coming through the wall, you don't forget it. It changes what you listen for. It changes how you hear things. In that way, if in no other, it was useful. Still, it haunts me. I told someone it haunts me, and they said that was dramatic, and I said, no, it just means I think about it more than I'd like to. Which I do, probably always will. That's all haunts means, I think, in the end. I'm at an intermediate level now in the language. Less than before. A little less all the time. That's enough. That's where I am. And that's Brendan. We've told a lot of stories on this channel. Some of them are simpler than this one. The man who lost everything to an obvious scam, the bar girl who took his savings in 6 weeks, the business partner who disappeared with the investment. Those stories have a clean shape. Man arrives, man is deceived, man loses. The lesson lands hard and clear. Brendan's story doesn't have a clean shape. That's precisely why we wanted to tell it. He wasn't ruined. She wasn't simply a villain. The mother was genuinely ill. Some of what passed between them was genuinely something. And he knows that and lives with it. And the living with it is harder in certain ways than a clean loss would be. What we take from this one is quieter than most. It's the thing Brendan said about profiles, about the way a careful man's carefulness can itself become the thing that's worked with. Not despite his vigilance, but because of it. Because his particular form of protection was understood and accounted for before he'd finished explaining it to himself. If you're a careful person watching this and you're thinking, well, Adam, that wouldn't happen to me because I'd notice, we gently suggest you sit with that thought for a moment. Brendan noticed. He noticed quite a lot. He filed it carefully and reached for the most reasonable explanation, which is what careful people do. And it served him right up until the Tuesday afternoon with the ceiling fan and the book and the 60% of a phone call he wasn't supposed to understand. Knowing is not the same as being safe. It's a start. It's not a finish. Thank you to Brendan for his honesty and for staying in Chiang Mai and for going to the language class on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. There's something in that we find genuinely worth respecting. And thank you for watching This is Thailand. We'll be back with another story. Until then, take care of yourselves out there. Take care of yourselves.